Hello, my name is Jim Toot, and I'm an Associate Professor of Political Science at Central Virginia Community College. In this module, we'll discuss political parties.
The Democratic and Republican parties have dominated for over 150 years because of their ability to adapt to changing political and cultural circumstances. In the early decades of the Republic, when voting rights were limited to male landowners, parties formed around charismatic leaders such as Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. When voting rights were extended, parties changed to accommodate the public. As immigrants came to the United States and settled in urban areas, party machines emerged and socialized the immigrants to politics. Parties also have adapted to changes in the media environment. When radio and television were new technologies, parties incorporated them into their strategies for reaching voters, including through advertising. More recently, the Republican and Democratic parties have advanced their use of the internet and digital media for campaigning, fundraising, and issue advocacy. The history of American political parties. Political parties are enduring organizations under whose labels candidates seek and hold elective office. Parties develop and implement rules governing elections. They help organize government leadership. Political parties have been likened to public utilities, such as water and power companies, because they provide vital services for a democracy. The endurance and adaptability of American political parties is best understood by examining their colorful historical development. Parties evolved from factions in the 18th century to political machines in the 19th century. In the 20th century, parties underwent waves of reform that some argue initiated a period of decline. The renewed parties of today are service-oriented organizations dispensing assistance and resources to candidates and politicians. The founders of the Constitution were fearful of the rise of factions, groups in society that organized to advance a political agenda. They designed a government of checks and balances that would prevent any one group from becoming too influential. James Madison famously warned in Federalist 10 of the mischief of factions, particularly a large majority that could seize control of government. The first American party had its origins in the period following the Revolutionary War. Upon taking office in 1789, President George Washington sought to create an enlightened administration devoid of political parties. He appointed two political adversaries to his cabinet, Alexander Hamilton as Treasury Secretary and Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, hoping that the two great minds could work together in the national interest. Washington's vision of a government without parties, however, was short-lived. Hamilton and Jefferson differed radically on their approaches to rectifying the economic crisis that threatened the new nation. Hamilton proposed a series of measures, including a controversial tax on whiskey and the establishment of a national bank. He aimed to have the federal government assume the entire burden of the debts incurred by the states during the Revolutionary War. Jefferson, a Virginian who sided with local farmers, fought this proposition. He believed that moneyed interests in the New England states stood to benefit from Hamilton's plan. Hamilton assembled a powerful group of supporters to promote his plan, a group that eventually became the Federalist Party. The Federalist Party originated at the national level but soon extended to the states, counties, and towns. Hamilton used business and military connections to build the party at grassroots level, primarily in the Northeast. Because voting rights had been expanded during the Revolutionary War, the Federalists sought to attract voters to their party. They used their newfound organization for propagandizing and campaigning for candidates. They established several big city newspapers to promote their cause, including the Gazette of the United States, the Columbian Sentinel, and the American Minerva, which were supplemented by broadsheets in smaller locales. This partisan press initiated one of the key functions of political parties, articulating positions on issues and influencing public opinion. Disillusioned with Washington's administration, especially its foreign policy, Jefferson left the cabinet in 1794. Jefferson urged his friend James Madison to take on Hamilton in the press, stating, "For God's sake, my dear sir, take up your pen, select your most striking heresies, and cut them to pieces in the face of the public." Madison did just that under the pen name Helvidius. His writings helped fuel an anti-Federalist opposition movement, which provided the foundation for the Republican Party. This early Republican Party differs from the present-day party of the same name. Opposition newspapers, the National Gazette, and Aurora communicated the Republicans' views and actions, and inspired local groups and leaders to align themselves with the emerging party. The Whiskey Rebellion. In 1794, farmers on the Western Front protested against a tax on whiskey that was part of Treasury Secretary Hamilton's plan to eliminate the national debt. The rebellion was suppressed by an army dispatched by the newly formed national government. Political parties were first evident in presidential elections in 1796 when Federalist John Adams was barely victorious over Republican Thomas Jefferson. During the election of 1800, Republican and Federalist members of Congress met formally to nominate presidential candidates, a practice that was a precursor to the nominating conventions used today. As the head of state and leader of the Republicans, Jefferson established the American tradition of political parties as grassroots organizations that band together smaller groups representing various interests, run slates of candidates for office, and present issue platforms. The earliest Federalist and Republican parties consisted largely of political office holders. The Federalists not only lacked a mass membership base, but were also unable to expand their reach beyond the moneyed classes. As a result, the Federalists ceased to be a force after the 1816 presidential election when they received few votes. The Republican Party, bolstered by the successful presidential candidates Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe, were the sole surviving national party by 1820. Infighting soon caused the Republicans to cleave into warring factions, the National Republicans and the Democratic Republicans. A true political party system with two durable institutions associated with specific ideological positions and plans for running government did not begin to develop until 1828. The Democratic Republicans, which became the Democratic Party, elected their presidential candidate, Andrew Jackson. The Whig Party, an offshoot of the National Republicans, formed in opposition to the Democrats in 1834. The era of Jeffersonian democracy, which lasted until the outbreak of the Civil War, featured the rise of mass media party politics. Both parties initiated the practice of grassroots campaigning, including door-to-door canvassing of voters and party-sponsored picnics and rallies. Citizens voted in record numbers, with turnouts as high as 96% in some states. Campaign buttons publicly displaying partisan affiliation came into vogue. The spoil systems, also known as patronage, where voters' party loyalty was rewarded with jobs and favors dispensed by the party elites, originated during this era. The two-party system consisted of the Democrats and Republicans was in place by 1860. The Whig Party disintegrated as a result of conflicts over patronage and the issue of slavery. The Democratic Party, divided over slavery, remained basically intact. The Republican Party was formed in 1854 during a gathering of former Whigs, disillusioned Democrats, and members of the Free Soil Party, a minor anti-slavery party. The Republicans came to prominence with the election of Abraham Lincoln. The donkey and the elephant have been symbols of the two major parties since cartoonist Thomas Nast popularized these images in 1860. Parties were especially powerful in the post-Civil War period through the Great Depression, when more than 15 million people immigrated to the United States from Europe, many of whom resided in urban areas. Party machines dominated political life in cities. Machines helped immigrants obtain jobs, learn the laws of the land, gain citizenship, and take part in politics. Machine politics was not based on ideology, but loyalty and group identity. Because party machines controlled the government, they were able to sponsor public works programs such as roads, sewers, and construction projects, as well as social welfare initiatives, which endeared them to their followers. The ability of party bosses to organize voters made them a force to be reckoned with, even as their tactics were questionable and corruption was rampant. Party bosses often used their powerful position for personal gain. Not everyone benefited from political machines. There were some problems that machines either could not or would not deal with. Industrialization and the rise of corporate giants created great disparities in wealth. Dangerous working conditions existed in urban factories and rural coal mines. Farmers faced falling prices for their products. Reformers blamed these conditions on party corruption and inefficiency. They alleged that party bosses were diverting funds that should be used to improve social conditions into their own pockets and keeping their incompetent friends in positions of power. The Progressive Era. The mugwumps, reformers who declared their independence from political parties, banded together in the 1880s and provided the foundation for the progressive movement. The progressive movement initiated reforms that lessened the party's hold over the electoral system. Voters had been required to cast color-coded ballots provided by the parties, which meant that their vote choice was not confidential. This led to the development of direct primary elections, an election that decides who will be a political party's nominee for an office in a general election, as opposed to caucuses that had been used up to that point, meetings held by party members to select candidates who will run for office. The progressives sought to end party machine dominance by eliminating their patronage system. Instead, employment would be awarded on the basis of qualifications rather than party loyalty, wounding political machines. The merit system, now called the civil service, was instituted in 1883 with the passage of the Pendleton Act. Progressive reformers ran for president under party labels. Former President Theodore Roosevelt split from the Republicans and ran as the Bull Moose Party candidate in 1912, and Robert La Follette ran as the Progressive Party candidate in 1924. The progressive reformers' goal of more open and representative parties resonate today. The New Deal and the Cold War era. Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal program for leading the United States out of the Great Depression in the 1930s had a dramatic effect on political parties. The New Deal placed the federal government in a pivotal role of ensuring the economic welfare of citizens. Both major political parties recognized the importance of being close to the power center of government and established national headquarters in Washington, D.C. An era of executive-centered government also began in the 1930s as the power of the president was expanded. The Cold War period that began in the late 1940s was marked by concern over the United States' relations with communist countries, especially the Soviet Union. Presidential candidates began to advertise their independence from parties and emphasize their own issue agendas, even as they ran for office under the Democratic and Republican labels. Political parties instituted a series of reforms beginning in the late 1960s amid concern that party elites were not responsive to the public and operating secretly. The Democrats formed the McGovern-Fraser Commission to revamp the presidential nominating system. The commission's reforms, adopted in 1972, allowed more average voters to serve as delegates to the National Party Nominating Convention, where the presidential candidate is chosen. Many state Democratic parties switched from caucuses to primary elections. The Republican Party soon followed with its own reforms that resulted in states adopting primaries. The unintended consequence of reform was to diminish the influence of political parties in the electoral process and to promote the candidate-centered politics that exist today. Candidates build personal campaign organizations rather than rely on party support. The media have contributed to the rise of candidate-centered politics. Candidates can appeal directly to the public through television rather than working their way through the party apparatus when running for election. Political parties play an important role in politics today. Compared to the 1970s, party organizations today are larger, farther reaching, and better financed. Relations among party officials in Washington and the states have improved dramatically. Voters are still more likely to cast their votes along partisan lines than independently. American political parties have distinct characteristics. The two major parties have been dominant for a long time. The parties are permeable, meaning that people can join or leave the party ranks freely. The two major parties are ideologically ambiguous, representing a broad spectrum of interests. A two-party system is one in which nearly all elected officials are held by candidates associated with the two parties that are able to garner the vast majority of the votes. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party are the major parties that have monopolized American politics since the early 1850s. A major party runs candidates for local, state, and federal offices in a majority of the states and holds one of the two largest blocks of seats in the U.S. Congress. Rather than assuming a strong, polarizing ideological alignment, the two major parties have traditionally represented the core values of American culture that favor centrist positions inherently in the liberal tradition of liberty, democracy, and equal opportunity. The Democratic Party is associated with a liberal attitude towards politics, which proposes that government should take a more active role in regulating the economy, provide a social safety net, and ensure equality in society through programs like affirmative action. The Republican Party agenda generally favors capitalism and limited government intervention in people's lives. The Republican Party is associated with a conservative outlook that advocates limited government intervention in society and a free market economic system. Rather than developing distinct ideological positions, parties develop policy platforms. Policy platforms are plans outlining party positions on issues and the actions leaders will take to implement them if elected. Political parties in the United States are porous, decentralized institutions. American parties are not mass membership organizations that require people to pay dues if they want to belong. Instead, party membership is very loosely defined, often by state laws that are highly variable. In some states, citizens declare a party affiliation when registering to vote, while in others, such as Virginia, they do not. Parties are umbrella organizations that accommodate labor and business federations, interest groups, racial and ethnic constituencies, and religious organizations. Traditionally, the Democratic Party has been home to labor unions, and the Republican Party has accommodated business interests, although these relationships are not set in stone. The fact that groups seeking to achieve similar political goals are found in both parties is evidence of their permeability. Pro-choice and anti-abortion forces exist within the two major parties, although the Democratic Party is far more accommodating to the pro-choice position, while the Republican Party is overwhelmingly pro-life. Parties compete for allegiances of the same group in an effort to increase their bases of support. The organizational structure of the political parties consists of the machinery, procedures, and rituals party leaders and professionals employ so that parties operate effectively in the electoral and governing process. National and state parties are large and complex organizations. They have permanent headquarters, chairpersons, board of directors, and full-time employees with specialized responsibilities. They maintain lists of officers and members, operate under established bylaws and rules, and hold scheduled meetings and conventions. Local parties range from highly active, well-organized professional structures to haphazard amateur operations. National party committees today are the power centers of the Republican Democratic parties. They are the ultimate authority in the party's organizational hierarchy. The Democratic National Committee, or the DNC, and the Republican National Committee, or the RNC, are both located in Washington, D.C. The DNC and RNC chairs are the leaders of the party organization and are visible representatives of the parties in the press. National organizations are responsible for putting on the nominating conventions where presidential candidates are selected every 4 years. National parties adapted to the era of candidate-centered politics by becoming service-oriented organizations, providing resources for candidates and office holders. They stepped up their fundraising activities, expanded their staffs, and established stronger linkages with the state, local, and candidate campaign organizations. The DNC and the RNC have established multimedia strategies that include traditional mass and new media appeals through press releases and staged events. Legislative campaign committees finance and manage legislative elections. Members of Congress officially oversee the committee staffs. The National Republican Congressional Committee, National Republican Senatorial Committee, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee help candidates for the House and Senate meet the demands of modern campaigning. They provide survey research to determine voters' candidate preferences and stands on issues. They recruit volunteers and raise funds for campaigns. These committees organize media appeals to promote the party's leaders and agenda through television advertising, press briefings, direct mail, email solicitations, and social media. State party organizations operate in vastly different environments because of the political culture of individual states. There is fierce competition between parties in some states, while other states lean more favorably toward one party. Party competition, however, exists in every state. Party and election laws vary greatly among the states. In Maryland, voters must register and declare their party identification 29 days before a primary election in order to participate. In Massachusetts, independents can register with a party to vote in that party's primary on election day. In Wisconsin, party preference is part of the secret ballot. Like their national counterparts, state parties provide candidates with services such as volunteer recruitment and polling. They offer citizens access to government leaders and information about issues. State parties have become multi-million-dollar organizations, most of which have their own headquarters, employ full-time staffs, and have operating budgets of over $500,000. State legislative campaign committees assist in campaigns by dispensing funds to candidates. Local party organizations exist at the legislative district, county, city, ward, and precinct levels. Some local parties are extremely vital, providing the link between average people and parties. In addition to fulfilling basic election functions, they sponsor public affairs programs, provide services to senior citizens and young people, and organize community events. Some local parties are less active because many community-level positions like town council seats are nonpartisan. The party in government constitutes the organized partisans who serve in office, such as members of the Democratic and Republican parties in Congress. Parties provide an organizational structure for leaders in office, develop policy agendas, and ensure that majority and minority party opinions are voiced. The party in government seeks to represent its supporters and enhance the prospects for re-election. It is the center of democratic action. Party coalitions of office holders can be a more powerful mechanism for voicing opinions than individual leaders acting on their own. Coalitions from opposing parties spar openly by taking different positions on issues. The president is the official symbolic leader of his party. Presidents can use this position to rally members of Congress to push their agendas or mobilize congressional partisans to enact policies. Other presidents prefer to adopt a policy of triangulation, where they work both sides of the congressional aisle. Since the 1990s, presidents have also assumed a major responsibility for party fundraising. Party discipline can be difficult to enforce given the diversity of constituency interests and personalities in Congress. The extent to which party members are willing to vote in a block varies over time. Party unity in congressional voting rose from 40% in the early 1970s to 90% or more since 2000. Legislative parties are the party organizations within each House of Congress. The Speaker of the House and Senate Majority Leader, the highest-ranking leaders in Congress, are members of the majority party. They work closely with the Majority Leader, Whip, Chair of the Policy Committee, and Chair of the Campaign Committee in each body. The House and Senate Minority Leaders had a similar cast on the opposite side of the partisan fence. The Democratic Caucus and the Republican Conference, consisting of all members elected from the party, are at the internal party organization within each House of Congress. They oversee committee assignments and encourage party discipline by asking members to vote along party lines. Divided government, which occurs when the chief executive is of a different party from the majority of the legislature, is a common occurrence in American government. Divided government can get in the way of cooperative policymaking. Presidential vetoes of legislation passed by Congress can be more frequent during periods of divided government. Party identification. A person's partisan identification is defined as a long-term attachment to a particular party. Americans are not required to formally join party organizations, as in the case of other democracies. Instead, people self-identify. They can also declare themselves independent and not align with any political party. As voter identification with political parties has declined, so has dedication to the two-party system. According to a national survey, citizens have more trust in product brands such as Nike, Levi's, Honda, and Clorox than in the Democrats and Republicans. Americans have become skeptical about the two major parties' ability to represent the public interest and to handle major issues facing the country, such as crime, the environment, and saving Social Security. At the same time, support for third parties, like the Tea Party, has increased over the last decade. Party coalitions consist of groups that have long-term allegiances to a particular political party. Regions of the country establish loyalties to a specific party as the result of the party's handling of a war, a major social problem, or an economic crisis. Social, economic, ethnic, and racial groups also become aligned with particular parties. Catholics and labor union members in the Northeast form a part of the Democratic coalition. White fundamentalist Protestants are a component of the Republican coalition. A major enduring shift in coalition loyalties that results in a change in the balance of power between the two major parties is called a realignment. Realignments can be sparked by critical elections where a minority party wins and becomes the majority party in the government following an election and remains dominant for an extended period of time. American parties realign about once every 30 or 40 years. Partisan de-alignment occurs when party loyalty declines and voters base their decisions on short-term election-specific factors such as the leadership qualities of a candidate. The inclination of people to identify as independents rather than as partisans is evidence that de-alignment is occurring. A partisan de-alignment may be occurring today as more people identify as independents and more voters select their candidates on the basis of personal traits such as honesty. Mass media can contribute to partisan realignment by focusing attention on candidates' personalities and scandals, which are short-term factors that can influence voters' choice. A minor party or third party is an organization that is not affiliated with the two major American parties, the Democrats or Republicans. Minor parties run candidates in a limited number of elections, and they do not receive large pluralities of votes. They arise when the two major parties fail to represent citizens' demands or provide the opportunity to express opposition to existing policies. Citizens often form a minor party by uniting behind a leader who represents their interests. Minor parties raise issues that the Democrats and Republicans ignore because of their tendency to take middle-of-the-road positions. As a result, minor parties can be catalysts for change. The Progressive Party backed the women's suffrage movement in the early 20th century, which led to the passage of the 19th Amendment. Child labor laws, the direct election of U.S. senators, federal farm aid, and unemployment insurance are policies enacted as a result of third-party initiatives. Recently, the Tea Party has raised issues related to the national debate, government bailouts to failing industries, and the national healthcare system overhaul. The Tea Party is a conservative-leaning grassroots political movement that emerged in 2009 when the Young Americans for Liberty in the state of New York organized a protest against state government tax and spend policies. Subsequently, Tea Party protests took place in states across the country. The Libertarian Party, founded in 1971, is an enduring minor party, which is a type of minor party that has existed for a long time and regularly fields candidates for president and state legislature. The Libertarians are unable to compete with the two major parties because they lack strong organizational foundation and the financial resources to run effective campaigns. The party also holds an extreme ideological position which can alienate voters. Libertarians take personal freedoms to the extreme and oppose government intervention in the lives of individuals, support the right to own and bear arms without restriction, and endorse a free and competitive economic market. Single-issue minor parties exist to promote a particular policy agenda. The Green Party is a product of the environmental movement of the 1980s. It advocates environmental issues such as mandatory recycling and strong regulations on toxic waste. Candidate-centered minority parties form around candidates who are able to rally support based on their own charisma or message. Former World Wrestling Federation star Jesse "The Body" Ventura was elected governor of Minnesota in 1998 under the Independence Party label, an offshoot of the Reform Party. Fusion minor parties, also known as alliance parties, are enduring or single-issue minor parties that engage in the practice of cross-endorsement, backing candidates who appear on ballots under more than one party label. Fusion parties routinely endorse candidates who have been nominated by the two major parties and support their causes. Cross-endorsement allows minor parties to contribute to the election of a major party candidate and thus gain access to office holders. In addition to giving a major party candidate an additional ballot position, Fusion parties provide funding and volunteers. A minor party candidate has never been elected president. In the past 5 decades, minor parties have held few seats in Congress or high-level state office. Few minor party candidates have won against major party candidates for governor, state representative, or even county commissioner in the past 2 decades. Minor party candidates have better luck in the approximately 65,000 nonpartisan contests for city and town offices and school boards in which no party labels appear on the ballot. A majority of the public favors having viable minor party alternatives in elections. Why then are minor parties unable to form a more formidable presence in American politics? One major reason for two-party dominance in the United States is the prominence of a single-member district plurality system of elections, also known as winner-take-all elections. Only the highest vote getter in a district in the federal and most state legislative elections gains a seat in office. Candidates who have a realistic chance of winning under such a system are almost always associated with the Democrat and Republican parties. In contrast, proportional representation systems, such as those used in most European democracies, allow multiple parties to flourish. PR systems employ larger, multi-member districts where 5 or more members of a legislature may be selected in a single election district. Seats are distributed according to the proportion of the vote won by particular political parties. Additional challenges facing minor parties: lack of resources, lack of media coverage, and absorption by major parties. When a minor party movement gains momentum, the major parties move quickly to absorb the minor party by offering enticements to their members, such as support for policies that are favored by the minor party. Major party candidates appeal to minor party supporters by arguing that votes for a minor party candidate are wasted. Political parties thrive when they are able to manage the media and effectively promote their candidates, leaders, and causes. Their goal is to use the media to publicize policy positions, activities, and leaders. Party organizations launch media blitzes and provide technical communications assistance to campaigns and government officials so that they can attract media attention. They also use media to inform and mobilize their loyalists. Media depictions tend to be dramatic, emphasizing infighting among party members as well as conflicts between the parties. Partisan spin. Political parties seek to influence the political debate on a daily basis by confronting the opposition in the media. They engage in spin, the practice of providing an interpretation of events or issues that favors their side. Specific media outlets are associated with spin doctors who favor a specific party. Conservative talk radio host Rush Limbaugh favors the Republican Party and draws a large audience. Liberal talk show hosts such as MSNBC's Rachel Maddow tend to support Democrats. The Fox News Network hosts spin doctors such as Bill O'Reilly, who calls his program a no-spin zone, despite its constant promotion of Republican conservative causes. Political advertising is a way for parties to disseminate messages without having them filtered by journalists. Parties engage in extensive issue advocacy or advertising campaigns that focus on legislative policies. Party websites offer a vast amount of information to average citizens, political activists, and journalists who take the initiative to visit them. Websites provide an effective mechanism for communicating information to citizens and can lessen the administrative burden on party organizations. The Democratic and Republican Party websites have become sophisticated. In addition to the site's content, visitors are offered an opportunity to connect with the party through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Flickr, and other social media. Parties as adversaries is an accurate characterization of one of their primary functions, representing opposing viewpoints and providing a platform debate. The modern party has been called a fighting organization. Indeed, parties actively promote this image. Reporters consulting party websites and reading partisan blogs get their fill of the negative hyperbole about the opposition. The press coverage can exaggerate the conflicts between parties by employing sports and war metaphors. This type of media coverage becomes a problem when the parties are generally trying to work together while the press continues to frame their relations in conflict terms. Media depictions often focus on strategies parties use to win elections and control government. The press is obsessed with how the Republicans and Democrats manage their message to attract or lose supporters. Media depictions suggest that the parties fail to live up to campaign promises about policies they will enact if their candidates are elected. However, press coverage is not consistent with research demonstrating that party leaders keep campaign promises at least 2/3 of the time.